Old woman said, "I'm sick. I can't walk. Can I stay one night?" What mountain man did Shocktown? The wind came first, wild and unkind, sweeping down from the white ridges and filling the pines with a long, hollow cry. It carried snow like handfuls of shattered glass, swirling across the mountain valley until even the trail vanished beneath it. The little log cabin crouched alone against the hillside, its chimney coughing smoke into the storm. Inside, a man sat before the fire, sharpening his knife. Every stroke sang quiet against the wet stone, steady his breath. Boone was not a man people sought out. He'd built this cabin with his own hands 10 winters ago and spoken fewer words since. His face was carved by years of sun and frost, his beard streaked with gray, his eyes the color of thawed ice. The town below called him the Mountain Man, sometimes with respect, sometimes with pity. He had learned to live with both. The night deepened, the wind thickened. He tossed another log into the flames and watched sparks leap like tiny birds trying to escape. He told himself the world outside was gone, nothing but wolves and snow and silence. Then came the sound that didn't belong, a knock, soft, uncertain, barely there. Then again, 3 uneven taps, swallowed quickly by the storm. Boone's hand froze on the knife. For a moment he thought the wind was tricking him, but the knock came once more, weaker now, a human sound muffled in snow. He rose slowly, the boards creaking beneath his boots. When he opened the door, the wind burst in, slapping his face with ice. Beyond it stood a small figure, an old woman, bent beneath the weight of the storm, snow clinging to her hair like ash. Her hands shook as she held them out, palms empty. "I'm sick," she said, voice trembling like thin glass. "I can't walk anymore. Can I stay one night?" Boone looked past her, nothing but darkness and drifting white. She was alone. Her shawl was soaked through, her boots thin, her breath a ghost in the air. He should have said no. The mountains had rules, and the first was survival. Strangers meant risk. But something about the way she stood there, refusing to fall, struck him. She was all frailty and stubbornness wrapped in snow. "Come in," he muttered. She did not hesitate. The warmth of the fire hit her face and she gasped, a small sound of relief that felt like prayer. Boone shut the door and the world outside vanished. She sank near the hearth, holding her hands toward the flames. Her fingers were bluish, swollen at the knuckles. Boone fetched a blanket from the cot and wrapped it around her shoulders. She nodded in thanks, but her eyes never left the fire. "What's your name?" he asked. "Martha," she said after a pause. "Martha Hale." He poured water into a kettle and set it over the fire. "You came a long way for winter." "I was going to my sister's place down past Coyote Bend." She smiled faintly. "Seems the road didn't want me." Boone grunted. Not much road left in this weather. Silence grew between them, filled only by the crackle of wood. The storm's voice outside softened to a low. Boone poured her tea when it boiled, and she drank with trembling hands, steam curling around her lined face. He saw in a light a woman once strong. A school teacher, perhaps, or someone who used to stand tall before the years been her. "You live here alone?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Safer that way." Her eyes flickered toward him, curious but kind. "Safe doesn't always mean living." Boone said nothing. He stared in the fire, jaw tight. The words lodged somewhere deeper than he expected. She dozed soon after, her head tilted against the chair back. Boone laid another log on the flames, watching her shadow quiver on the wall. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft now, steady. He should have felt intruded upon, yet the cabin didn't seem smaller with her in it, only warmer. When morning came, the light was pale blue. Boone found her awake but struggling to rise. She winced as she tried to stand. "Don't," he said gruffly. "You'll fall over. I just need to stretch." Her breath came hard. "I've been walking 3 days." He ladled stew from a pot left near the hearth. She thanked him with her eyes more than words, and ate slowly, carefully, as if manners still mattered even at the edge of the world. He asked where she came from. She told him about a town by the river where she taught children their letters in a schoolhouse no bigger than a barn. "They used to bring me wildflowers in spring," she said softly. "I used to think I'd die there. Then the prairie fire came, took the school, my home, my husband. Everything but this old shawl." Boone stirred the pot, pretending not to listen too closely. But he saw her fingers tracing the worn fabric of that shawl like it was a relic. "You didn't have anyone left." "I did," she said, eyes distant. "A sister far off. Thought I'd reach her before the snow." She smiled, thin and weary. "Seems the mountain found me first." For the rest of the day, Boone chopped outside. He needed the work, the clean rhythm of the axe to steal his thoughts. He wasn't used to company. Every sound she made inside, her cough, her movement, broke the quiet he'd lived with for years. Yet somehow he didn't resent it. That night she tried to stand again and nearly fell. Boone caught her elbow. Her skin was fever warm. "You shouldn't have left that fire," he said. "I won't burden you long," she murmured. "Just need to rest." He shook his head. "You're no burden. Just don't die in my cabin." Her laugh came dry, surprising both of them. "I'll do my best." He found medicine in a tin box, the last remnants of his mother's herbs. She watched him crush them into water with care. She hadn't expected from a man so rough. "You've done this before," she said. He hesitated. "Long time ago." "For your wife? For a boy?" He answered quietly. Didn't help him none. She didn't ask more. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was the kind that understood loss without needing words. The snow outside thickened again, brushing against the windows like a restless spirit. Boone stoked the fire, its light climbing over the walls. The room smelled of pine and smoke and old iron. She watched him work. "You remind me of one of my students," she said, hard-headed. Never spoke much, but his heart was kind once he got close enough to hear it beat. He glanced at her. He lied. "Last I heard," she whispered, "he went off to war, never came back." Boone looked away. His hands stopped moving. The kettle hissed softly, breaking the stillness. She closed her eyes then, slipping into half-sleep, her breathing shallow but calm. Boone sat across from her, knife still in hand, staring into the flames as if they might answer something he'd forgotten to ask. Days passed like that, slow as melting ice. The storm refused to end. Boone hunted when he could, brought back rabbit and dried wood. Martha grew weaker, but her spirit did not. She began to read aloud from a small Bible she kept in her bundle, her voice low and cracked, yet steady. "When I was hungry, ye gave me meat," she read one night. "When I was a stranger, ye took me in." Boone said nothing, but his hands paused over the fire. The words seemed to echo around the cabin, touching every empty space. "You believe that?" he asked finally. "I tried to." He nodded once. "Reckon trying's all any of us can do." Outside, wolves howled from somewhere deep in the timber. The sound sent a shiver through her, but Boone only listened. Then threw another log into the fire. "They won't come near," he said. "Fire keeps the wild away." She looked at him for a long moment. "It keeps more than that away, I think." He met her eyes, unsure whether she meant the wolves or the loneliness. The next morning the sun returned, thin and colorless, but enough to make the snow glitter. Boone stepped outside to fetch water. The valley stretched silent and white, unbroken. He felt the cold burn his lungs, felt something clean in it. When he came back in, Martha was staring at the window, smiling faintly. "I dreamed the school again," she said. The children were there. They were singing. Boone poured her tea. "You miss them." "I miss being needed," she said simply. He said nothing. The words clung to him as he worked as the hours drifted by. That night he caught himself humming an old tune, a lullaby he hadn't heard since his boy's last winter. The sound startled him. He stopped, embarrassed, but Martha was smiling. "You have a kind voice," she said. "Not much use for it. Then maybe I'll borrow it till mine comes back." He shook his head, but she laughed softly. And in that laughter, something in the cabin changed. Less like two strangers surviving, more like two souls thawing. As dusk fell, Boone stepped out again to Splitwood. Snow drifted from the trees in silver sheets. When he returned, he saw Martha sleeping by the fire, her face calm, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. He reached to adjust it. Beneath the fabric, a folded scrap of paper peeked out, yellowed, creased by years. Without meaning to, he opened it. The ink was faded, but he knew the handwriting before the words formed. His own name scrolled in the corner. A letter addressed to Eli Boone's father. His heart stilled, the room blurred. He looked down at the sleeping woman, her breath shallow but even, and the truth struck like lightning through snow. The stranger at his door wasn't just lost. She'd come from the same past he'd spent 10 winters trying to bury. The wind rose again outside, whispering against the windows like it knew a secret he wasn't ready to face. Snow still gripped the mountains when the letter slipped from Boone's hands. The paper trembled between his fingers. The ink faded, but clear enough to slice open the years he tried to bury. His son's name, Eli Boone, written in the neat strokes of a teacher's hand, the same hand that now trembled beside his fire. Martha stirred in her sleep, her face calm under the blanket, unaware that her rescuer had just discovered who she truly was. Boone folded the letter slowly and set it back beneath her shawl. His breath shook, part sorrow, part awe. Outside, the storm's voice softened, as if it too waited for him to speak. The days that followed blurred together, gray and white. Martha grew weaker. Her cough deepened. Boone chopped wood until his hands bled, more to drown his thoughts than to warm the cabin. Every creak of her chair reminded him of the son he'd lost, the boy who had once run laughing down this same ridge before war took him. He thought isolation could quiet that memory. He'd been wrong. It had only left space for ghost to echo. On the 5th morning, he saddled his horse and rode through snow that reached the animal's chest. He needed medicine, needed help, needed something to do besides watch a dying woman breathe. The town sat 20 meters downhill, a scatter of shacks huddled near the frozen river. As Boone rode in, heads turned. The blacksmith stopped hammering. The saloon doors creaked open. "That the hermit?" someone muttered. "He's still alive?" Boone dismounted at the apothecary, his coat crusted white with frost. The clerk, a narrow man with sharp eyes, stared. "Didn't expect to see you this side of the mountain." "Need quinine," Boone said, "and willow bark fever for yourself." He shook his head. "Old woman found her in the storm." The man frowned but filled the order. By the time Boone turned to leave, a small crowd had gathered outside. The blacksmith leaned on his hammer. "You harboring strays now, Boone?" Boone's jaw clenched. "She's sick." The blacksmith spat in the snow. "Plenty of sick folks. Ain't our business saving them all." Boone didn't answer. He mounted his horse and rode out, the whispers following him like smoke. By the time he reached the ridge again, the light was gone. Lantern in one hand, reins in the other. He fought the wind until the cabin came into view, its single window glowing faintly. When he stepped inside, Martha was awake but pale, her eyes distant. "You shouldn't have gone," she said weakly. "You needed this." He held up the medicine. "You'll be right soon." Her smile was small but steady. "I've been right before, even in dying." "Don't say that. I've seen enough winters, son." The words slipped from her mouth like a sigh. She caught herself, then whispered, "Forgive me, Habit." He stared at her, heart heavy. "You knew my boy?" "I did," she said softly. "He was brave. He saved children from stampede once. He said his father taught him courage." Boone sank onto the stool, the weight of years pressing down. "I didn't teach him near enough. You gave him strength, I saw in his eyes." He looked at her then, and something inside him broke quietly, like ice cracking beneath the sun. That night her fever worsened. Boone sat by her side, wiping sweat from her brow, feeding her spoonfuls of broth when she stirred. She murmured fragments of prayers, bits of old hymns. When dawn came, she slept at last, her breathing shallow but calm. Boone stayed awake, watching the fire die down to embers. By evening, the storm returned. The wind roared like an animal clawing at the walls. Boone wrapped her in every blanket he owned. Then he saw it, the fire guttering low, woodpile gone. He had to fetch more from outside, though the night was near blinding. He opened the door and stepped in a white chaos. Snow whipped across his face, freezing his beard solid. The woodpile lay half-buried 50 paces from the cabin. He fought through the drifts, hauled armfuls back, slipped once, nearly vanished in the storm. When he stumbled inside again, his coat rimed with ice. Martha's eyes were open, watching him. "You'll die if you keep it that," she whispered. "Then we'll die warm," he muttered, feeding a fire. For a long time neither spoke. Then faintly she said, "You're a good man, Boone." He shook his head. "Too late for that," she smiled. The kind of smile that forgives without words. Mercy's never late. Her strength faltered after that. By the second night she could barely sit up. Boone sat beside her bed, the Bible open where she'd left it. He tried to read, the words rough on his tongue. "When I was a stranger," he stopped, voice breaking. "You took me in," she finished softly. "You did, Boone. You took me in." The wind outside quieted, as if the mountain itself were listening. At dawn he heard hooves through the stillness. A figure approached from the lower trail. A doctor, thin and shivering, led by a farm hen Boone, had bribed with venison and coffee to guide him through the paths. The doctor examined her, shaking his head. "Not much I can do but pray. She's stronger than she looks, though." Boone stayed beside her through the day, holding her hand as the doctor left. She drifted between dreams and waking, sometimes speaking his son's name, sometimes whispering scripture. When night fell, she turned her head toward him. "He would have been proud of you," she murmured. Boone swallowed hard. "I wasn't there for him. You're here for me. Maybe that's the same thing." The fire cracked softly. Snowlight spilled through the window, blue and silent. Boone didn't move for hours. When he finally did, it was only to stoke the flame, as if refusing to let the night win. She slept through until morning. For the first time in weeks, her breathing was steady. Boone stepped outside. The world transformed. The storm had cleared. The valleys shone like glass under the rising sun. Every tree was silvered with frost. He stood there bareheaded, feeling the air sharp and alive in his chest. He thought of the letter, thought of his boy, thought of how in saving a stranger, he had met the only piece of his past still breathing. When he returned, she was awake, sitting upright for the first time in days. "It's beautiful," she whispered, eyes on the window. "All that white like heaven forgot to close the door." He smiled faintly. "You're getting poetic on me. Maybe you're rubbing off." Spring came slow that year. By the time the snow melted enough for the road to clear, Martha could walk with a cane. Boone helped her onto his horse, and they rode to town together. Heads turned again, but this time no one spoke. She wore her same worn shawl, her eyes bright despite the weight of age. At the apothecary, the clerk looked startled. "You made it through winter." Boone nodded once. "We both did." The blacksmith approached, hat in hand. "Heard tell you near froze savin' her." Boone looked at Martha, then back at the man. "She saved me." The words settled over the square like falling snow, soft, undeniable. Martha stayed a while in town, helping at the church school. Children loved her stories, her gentle way of speaking. Boone visited often, though he never stayed long. The townsfolk began leaving bread by his cabin door, mended tools, little notes that simply said, "Thank you." By summer, a sign appeared at the trail's foot, Mercy Creek. No one claimed to have made it, but everyone knew why it was there. That fall, when the first frost returned, Boone rode down once more. Martha waited by the river, sitting on a bench the children had built. She looked frail but content, the wind tugging at her shawl. "I should thank you," she said as he dismounted. "You gave me one last winter worth remembering." He shook his head. "You gave it meaning." They sat together until dusk, saying little. When he left, she pressed the folded letter into his hand. "Keep it," she said. "It belongs to both of us now." He rode home under a sky streaked gold and violet. The mountains loomed ahead, vast and quiet. When he reached his cabin, he hung the letter above the hearth. The fire caught it with a flicker of light, not burning but holding it there. Memory turned into warmth. That night he dreamed of his son, standing at the edge of the forest, smiling, snow falling around him like blessing. When morning came, the mountains were alive again, and so was Boone. He stepped outside, breathed the cold, clean air, and whispered to no one, "Mercy keeps the wild away." And somewhere below, in the town that once mocked him, church bells began to ring.